Thank you, everyone, for coming. I do want to say and put a thank you out to our marketing staff. They spend all year long putting this show together. We have 1,300 or 1,400 people registered, so we're expecting well over 1,000 folks to show up today. Also, I want to let everyone know that everything we're going to talk about today is in our slides, and we're going to be handing out the slides afterwards. So you don't need to take a lot of notes. But afterwards, after the IT Summit next week sometime, you'll get a survey. You complete the survey. That then gives you access to go and pull down all the presentations from today. The other thing I want to mention, I'd like this to be very interactive. We have an expert from the National Contracts Management Association with us here today. So please ask questions, and particularly we get to the Q&A session at the end, we'll have a handheld microphone we want to pass around. So please, if you have a question, let's ask for the mic. And I believe this is the last session. We're going to go for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then right into lunch after that. We have a great speaker at lunchtime, so please, after leaving here, make sure you head over to lunch and get settled in to listen to that speaker. Before we get started, I want to ask, how many of you work for the manufacturers, either software developers, manufacturing companies? Raise them a little higher, so, okay, about a fourth maybe. And then how many of you are with the resellers, solution providers, systems integrators? Okay, bigger portion. And since this is titled Contracts and Programs, how many of you are involved in either as a program manager, managing contracts, trying to do updates to SOUP and GSA schedule, and more on the support administrative side of the house? Not so many. And I'm then guessing the rest of you are involved in sales and trying to figure out how to use these contracts. Okay, so we got a lot of sales folks here. Perfect. Very good. And the flow of what we're going to do here today, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes going over a couple of updates on some of the GSA schedules and things coming down the pike. Jenny's then going to talk about her programs that she's managing at Immix Group. And then we'll bring Michael up on stage to join us, and we'll have an interactive conversation. So one of the first things I want to talk about that's been a challenge for a lot of us, and a lot of the program management folks, is GSA on the GSA schedule. For those that are familiar, in order to put your products or services on GSA schedule, you have to fill out what's called a CSP, Commercial Sales Practice. Is everybody familiar with that? How many deal with the CSP? So the CSP, Commercial Sales Practice form, is where your company has to certify the discount structure that you're going to honor on that GSA schedule. And when I say certified, that form then gets signed by either the CEO of the company, a chief financial officer, or someone that's an officer that can bind the company. The challenge has always been, once GSA agrees to that price, you have your commercial sales practice, and in that form, you're identifying what your most favored customer pricing is. And so I'll just give an example. Let's say you sell something for $100. Your most favored customer commercial sales practice might be a 20% discount. So you put that item on GSA at $80 for quantity one. And then what happens is you have sales folks that are out selling the product, and maybe they're selling at less than $80. But within the company, within GSA, there's not a whole lot of visibility. You can't track that until somewhere down the road, GSA decides to do an audit. They start auditing your orders. They find out that, oh, your folks have been selling at less than that $80 price point. So guess what? You're now going to owe the government back a lot of money. They're going to go back to those sales and those orders, and they're going to find all the ones that were less than $80, and they're going to add that all up. And those amounts have been in the tens of millions of dollars. And there's not a way to control that and track that. And it's been a real problem with a lot of the manufacturers, and particularly it's happened to Oracle a couple times, happened to them in the last year or two again, where they had to pay a bunch of money back. So you have companies like Oracle simply saying, I'm not going to put my product on GSA schedule anymore. It's too hard to manage. I can't figure it out. I don't want to get audited. I don't want to have fines, so we're just not doing it. So what the government is starting to do is to do away with that CSP process, and they're calling it a transactional data report, TDR. The difference is, again, you don't have to certify your commercial sales practice, but what you do have to do, again, once you establish that price, let's say it's $80, once you establish that price, you're then going to report your actual sales monthly. So GSA is going to get all that data, detailed data, on a line item, and they'll know exactly what you're selling that product for. So they can spot immediately if you're selling it less than $80 on a routine basis, then they're going to change and reduce that contract price down to something lower. So the advantage is GSA is getting away from this, what I call a reactive mode and audit process, and they're now moving to something that's trying to be a little more proactive, where they can establish the price, they can spot it early on in the process, and reduce that price, and hopefully avoid all these audits and penalties. So if there's one thing I'd like you to take away about the TDRs and that whole process, the other thing that GSA does when they get your monthly transactional data report, they're also looking at other GWACs and other contract pricing. So they're looking at the SOUP contract, and maybe they're looking at NetSense, and they're looking at some of those other contracts. They're looking at all that data, and again, so the idea is to spot these lower prices up front and drive the prices down. And so what that means for you, for any of you, your companies that hold those SOUP contracts, NetSense contracts, it's important that you pay attention to the price that you're establishing on those catalogs. You want to establish your quantity one pricing. So when you establish a catalog price, say on SOUP, right, you want to keep that price up here, closer to that $100 list price, retail price. When you update your pricing on SOUP, that's not the time to put on your catalog that enterprise license pricing. So if you offer a customer, say you're doing a $10 million deal, you offer them a $50 million or a 50% discount, you don't want that $50 price to be your quantity one pricing on the catalog. So just be aware of the pricing that you're putting on the SOUP and the NetSense contracts. I'll talk briefly about GSA's also recently added a new set of CLINs, or they call them SINs, Schedule Identification Numbers, and what they call HACs, it's cybersecurity or highly adaptive cybersecurity. There are 4 new SINs, and this is in the SIN number is 132-45, I believe it is. And they've assigned, so of the 4 SINs, penetration, testing, incident response, and then cyber, they have 4 different SIN numbers. The reason GSA has done that is on your normal services schedule item number, which would fall under 132-51, right? That's the services CLIN where you upload all your labor rates, you have all those labor rates. The current process is when you report sales under that services CLIN, there isn't a breakout, and so the GSA and the government doesn't have transparency into how much of that revenue or how much of those sales are going towards cybersecurity or how much is going to network management or video teleconferencing. So what GSA is starting to do is create these additional SINs, and in this case, the cybersecurity SINs for services, and so that you'll report under those 4 specific buckets, and that allows GSA to start collecting that data. Great concept, makes a lot of sense. The challenge is, from a sales perspective, there's now additional item numbers. You may have been selling your services under CLIN 132-51, the generic service, and now there's created new SINs. If a contracting officer puts out an RFP on these new SINs, and if you haven't updated your schedule and you don't have those SINs available on your schedule, then you're not going to be able to bid that project. So for you salespeople in the room, it's important just to be aware of this. You don't need to know all the nitty-gritty details, but just be aware that there are new SINs, new services line items being added to GSA schedule. and talk to your management at your company and determine, does it make sense for our company to add these new SINs? And then certainly when you're talking to your customers, if this is something that they feel is important and they want the services to be reported under these SINs, then by all means, that's where you'll want to get with your company and make sure you add these SINs to your GSA schedule. I'm going to skip over Defense Acquisition Streamlining Act right now. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I do want to talk about, there's other updates that GSA is looking to put out. First of all, I don't know if anybody heard, there's a new VETS 2 services contract was just awarded just in the last week or two. So that program will replace the original VETS contract. There were roughly 200 proposals were submitted. They awarded 70 contracts to 70 veteran-owned companies and service-disabled veteran-owned companies. Again, it was recently awarded. So with only 70 awards out of 200, that means there's 130 people upset they didn't win a contract. So it's likely we'll go through a protest period. But if you're selling to Veterans Affairs, that's a contract that you'll want to get more information on and find out who those 70 contract holders are so that you can team up with them and sell your services and products into the Veterans Affairs. Another update is, again, along the lines, GSA is adding SINs. About a year ago, they added Schedule ID numbers for cloud services, and that's another SIN. And that one is 132-40. So again, with cloud, they added the SIN so that, they sell the cloud services. They want to track and report cloud services in 3 or 4 different schedule item numbers so they can keep track of all the funding and the sales in those areas. The confusion it's caused, cloud services, right? The government's now buying licenses and they're paying for it on an annual basis or as you use basis. So that definition of a term license kind of conflicts with the other term license of software that we've all sold for the last decades. So GSA is in the process now of amending the contracts and changing the definitions of what's a term license versus maintenance. Maintenance service in the past has always been considered service, so it comes out of a different pot of money. And in the future, GSA is going to change that definition. They're going to call it maintenance as a product. So now we can look at it as a product basis. It'll have a part number, just like we've sold in the past, and frankly should make it a lot easier for all of us contractors to get paid up front for maintenance as a product. So with that, I will turn it over to Jenny, and she can talk about some of the programs Immix Group's working.
Hi, thank you, everybody. So you have your handout, and next slide, please. So I'm going to talk at a high level about SOUP, NetSense, ITES. The major changes with SOUP is that they now have the established authorized reseller program. And this program has been established because, as we all know, all of our federal government programs or contracts are thinking about supply chain risk management, right? So SOUP established this, and they actually work with industry to see who had these programs in place and get our input as to how they can establish theirs. So it helps mitigate the risk for supply chain. And if you are not certified as an EARP provider, you cannot quote some of the opportunities that are there that have that requirement. The contracting officers establish that on their RFQs, and you will not be able to quote if that hasn't been established with SOUP. Another thing about these EARP things, my apologies. Another thing that has been established as SOUP are the agency catalogs, right? SOUP doesn't like calling them BPA, but now an agency can establish a catalog of products that they're going to be purchasing on a regular basis and establish that catalog specific to that agency. The only thing about that is the pricing is not available through the CHOP. The pricing for those catalogs is only available to the agencies to see, because it is competitive pricing. It is better than the SOUP pricing, and that's what those catalogs are established to help agencies order items that they order frequently. Those are the major changes on SOUP. We've created these handouts for you. It goes more in depth of where the funding is at, how much spending is in each of these enterprise programs. IMIX holds the SOUP, NetSense, and ITEST contracts directly, but we're there to support our partners with opportunities that they would like or need to go through these contracts. NetSense, the only update is that it's on option year 2, and the conversation is about the replacement contract, right? There's uncertainty about it being another NetSense 3 contract. There is information on the NetSense website that they're saying the ASSB, it might be a replacement contract, and more information will come out on that in 2018. The ITES definitely has major changes. They updated or increased the ceiling from $49 million to $179 million. This started as a pilot program. The Army wanted to see if it was going to be a successful program, and it has been a successful program. The certificate of networthiness requirement on that is actually, and they've compared it to some of the NIST requirements, and it really is compliant. So that is one of the major changes. And in addition, there was a special notice that was released in October about ITES 2. We will be attending the information exchange event that will happen on December 12th. So that is available to industry. If you guys are interested in looking into that, is on the CHESS website. And it's also on FBO. There are going to be one-on-one sessions as well in December. And the RFI will be released for that January of 2018. And they'll have another industry day in April of 2018. Those are the major changes for these programs. If I can get the next slide. So these are the programs that IMIX does not hold these contracts directly. We support our partners in them, and you will see again the spending information will be in the handouts for you. The NIATAC contract, no major changes there. It's a GWAC. Commodities, Robert Cohen is no longer there, but the contract's still there. Next Gen contract, right now we currently support HP, as you guys may be aware. The Navy has delayed the award of the next, the follow-on, and they are actually looking to award it to multiple companies, not just HP and GDIT that currently have the contract. More information will be coming out on that. The next thing that we are supporting is the GSA EIE, Enterprise Infrastructure Contract. 10 awardees were on that contract. We supported with the telecom products that were proposed on this contract vehicle. And next slide. Say again? When you say supported, what support is that? Good question. So we supported our partners in letting our manufacturers know what the vehicle would encompass. It is the EIS contract replaced the WITS 3 contract, and it is a telecom, and we did support our partners and continue to support them on the telecom products. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, I can definitely let you know. So the awardees on that contract are... Question, okay. So the awardees are AT&T, VF Federal, Core Technologies, Granite Telecom, Harris Corporation, L3, Microtech, Quest, Verizon. We have supported all of those in a different fashion. Okay? And then the next slide that I'm going to go into is going to be the CDM program. Who here hasn't heard about the CDM program, I should probably ask. So I've been involved with the CDM program since 2013. When it was first awarded, I actually worked at Microtech and supported it on the prime side. And then I joined IMIX supporting it and supporting all of our SIs. The program originally started with 17 SIs, and it was issued with a base plus 4 option years. So option year 4 was not awarded to the 17 primes. we're actually now supporting 6 primes who were the only ones that received the option year 4. And that program is actually transitioning from the CDM BPA to the CDM SINs, and that's why you'll see the middle there. IMIX is actually our IMIX Technology and EC America GSA schedules are 2 of 6 contract holders that have the CDM SINs established on our GSA Schedule 70. We were actually grandfathered because we have been supporting the program and the SIs since it was awarded in 2013. One thing I want to mention to the partners that are here and working and that we support, are the SIs and the partners. IMIX is actually going to allow our partners to receive awards through the CDM SIN with your manufacturer's approval. So if you are working on a specific with a specific manufacturer that's part of the CDM's program, please reach out to our account teams, and they can get you guys established with the appropriate paperwork so you can participate in our CDM SINs program. The Alliant contract is going to be the services acquisition contract for the CDM, and the Alliant primes have a FAR 51 letter that allows them to come and procure the products from IMIX Group. So the CDM SINs have been established for the Alliant primes to be able to purchase product from us, as well as the government, right? The government can now come directly to the contract holder and purchase their products. For the task orders that are now called CDM Defend that will be going through the Alliant program, Group B is set to be awarded sometime in January. Group A is actually, right now, the primes are working, the Alliant primes that will be responding are working on their responses. And so those primes will be coming to us to purchase the product once the product is required on that program. The difference from the CDM program is, for those of you that have been involved, you could get the product, or the primes could come and get pricing from us at the time the solicitation was out. Through the Alliant program, they no longer have to come and get the products from us to include as part of their solicitations. Because it is a services-based solicitation, they come to us post-award and let us know what they need, and we will be supporting that product requirement for them. And that's all I have on the CDM program. As we go further into our session, if you guys have additional questions, we'll be happy to answer them, and I'm going to let Ray introduce Michael, our guest.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you, Jenny. I wanted to add one thing to Jenny on some of these contracts that IMIX Group holds. For example, our SOUP contract. Is everybody familiar with SOUP when I mention it? SEWP, it's not SOUP, it's not SOUP. SEWP, Enterprise-Wide Procurement. It's managed by NASA. Certainly, IMIX Group, we hold that contract as a prime, so that if you don't have a contract, you're more than welcome to team with us and sell your products through us. However, I just want to let you know, from a sales perspective, it's also very important that you team with some of the other small businesses that hold that SOUP contract. IMIX is a large business on that contract, so if you're talking to their government customers and they want to set it aside for a small business, whether it's a service disabled or hub zone, there's 40 or 50 of those small business companies that hold that contract. You'll need to team with one of them. So just keep that in mind. We'd love to work with you. You're welcome to use our contracts, but it's also important that you team up with those small businesses. So with that, does anybody have any questions so far?
No, something I will add to what Ray just said regarding the contracts we hold. IMIX won these contracts when we were a small business, right? And we got acquired from Arrow, and we're now a large business. So the replacement for the NetSense is actually a small business requirement. And that replacement information will come out in 2018. But again, we're here to support those opportunities or the solicitations as you guys need support on them.
Okay. Michael, you want to join us on stage? And where's Max? Were we going to put these chairs together? Is Max still in here? No? He left. I guess we'll just stand.
Sure.
Is that okay?
We can.
So let me read Michael's bio. It's very impressive. Michael's the executive director with the National Contracts Management Association. If you're not familiar with NCMA, it's a professional association that represents more than, or has 20,000 acquisition professionals that are members. They have 100 chapters worldwide, annual budget of $10 million. Michael has a staff of roughly 30 people. And you can go to the website is ncmahq.org. You can learn more about the association. Certainly, if you're in program management, contracting, acquisition, it's a great organization that you should join. Michael's career includes roles. He was at the Military Healthcare System, the Office Secretary of Defense TRICARE, worked at Department of Energy, and was a Federal Senior Executive Service, SES. He has a Juris Doctorate from Northwestern California, Defense University, Industrial College, an MA in Business Management from Central Michigan, and a BA in Economics and Political Science from the State University of New York. I don't know what you do in your spare time, but that's... So Michael, thank you, and Michael's here to present his views on some of the changes coming down the pike, some of the things being discussed in legislation on the Senate as they affect acquisitions going forward. So we'll turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks for having me. And I also, by the way, if you're interested, I have my business cards. I do run a small dog walking service, and I'll be happy to mow your lawn. So contract management is always good to have a backup plan. So thanks for, great to be here. I'll try to be the best plan B that I can. So contract management, I've been in it for 30 years. By the way, I noticed WITS. I was the first contracting officer on the WITS program, the original GSA program back in the old GSA NCR region under the FTS way back then. I've been on the F-14 program. I've been in services. I've been IT. I did 8 years at DISA. So I've been around, seen a lot. And very interesting, too. A lot of my colleagues growing up as GS-7s and 9s and 11s and 12s and spent time in industry, too, at Raytheon E-Systems and Black World stuff. They're now all those senior procurement executives, those CAOs, the heads of procurement that you run into. A lot of them are baby boomers like myself and probably getting ready to check out. And there's a lot of talk about what that might mean as well. So a little bit about the contract manager. Who are they? Contracting officers, they are the responsible party. They're the one that signed that document. They are looking for the responsible party within your firm, your company. Who's the contract administrator? They're looking for, first off, they teach us that right at our basic classes, make sure the person you're negotiating and talking to has the authority to do that. So whenever you're working with the government on large complex programs and IT, et cetera, and you're talking to folks in the government, make sure they have the authority to give you the direction or give you the changes, or that they really have the ability to say maybe what they're saying. Sometimes they may say things, but they really don't have the authority. And so you want to find that COR or the contracting officer or project manager and try to get it in writing if it's a significant document. So the contract manager is tend to be liberal arts, grew up doing all kinds of other different things, probably not more business-oriented in the younger workforce, but back in the day, like you said, I majored in political science, and no one was going to pay me to read the newspaper, so I needed to get a job and ended up in contracting. And I would say that's actually, we laugh about it, it's also you end up in contracting. Unfortunately, in the government, that's how it is. In private sector, you might have graduated with a degree in supply chain from a major university and gone into a corporate environment. In federal government, particularly, or state, you sort of ended up in it some way or another. So that's important to know. It's changing a little bit, but probably not as quickly as much as we would like, and that's what our whole role of our profession is. So just some comments I wanted to make. So the contract manager of my day, way back in the old days, was the FAR interpreter, right? They were no, you can't do that. Let me find a reason in the FAR why you can't do that. And so now that's changing. That's they good ones, and maybe that's not totally changing. Maybe your particular environment may this may be resonating, but the contract specialist is the contract manager, is the project manager. They're the supply chain manager. They're the business developer. They're the business advisor. They should be at the seat at the table when these strategies, these schemes that NASA SOUP, et cetera, when these come out, they should be there to know the implications from a contract management standpoint. And because they're responsible to instruct and create all that information that government may be dreaming up and instruct you in industry as to how it should be, so that when you read an RFP, you know where they're coming from. you know, and that you have an opportunity to ask those questions through RFIs or industry days or whatever means. So they have to have those interpersonal relationship skills. They have been burdened over the years by being bogged down more and more into data collection and data reporting. There was a lot of administrative support staff that went away when, you know, everything from phone mail to computers came out. And so they're supposed to be out there meeting with the project managers, being a part of the team, meeting with industry, but it's hard to get the heck out of the office to do that when you're so busy sending out reports and the latest missives from the Hill or whatever the, you know, the boss, the general wants to know this, that, and the other. So a lot of that is unfortunate. I will say right now that the complexity that is much discussed in government contracting, I think we can point a couple of places. One is it has nothing to do with the FAR, absolutely nothing to do with the FAR. I can tell you, and I've said this many times, you know, if you have the right requirement and you have the money and you are willing to pay, you know, you're willing to pay the price, I can get you a tank. I can have it in this room in 2 hours. There's a cost to that. You know, you have to have a requirement. You have to do things like justify it. You know, you have to know why you want to do that. That's why you have an acquisition plan. It's all common sense. It's a lengthy, thousands of pages of common sense is all it ever is. It's the same intuitive process you go through when you put a deck on your house or buy a new car. You go through these sorts of processes, low price, best value, it's a brand identity, all those things. That's what the FAR is. The length of time and the reason it takes so long is, and the contracting officer tends to get the hit on this, is because they're at the end of a long chain of screwing around, quite frankly, in the government. You know, a lot of requirements definition and, you know, we don't know and we don't know if we have the money and lots of time and coordination and over-coordination and approvals that have nothing to do with requirements. So, you know, there's where there's the one problem. And then I would also argue that, and we see this in the latest NDAA, just additional complexities, you know. We don't like where it's going, so we're going to help you. So we're working at cross purposes right now. You've got panels like 809 that are working at what can we fix and what can we streamline, what can we do boldly to remove impediments on the acquisition workforce, while at the same time on the same committee we're developing new, you know, the Data Act and other things that are just going to introduce more complexity and confusion and counterintuitive or counteracting other requirements. You know, we want full and open competition, but not here. You know, we want sole sources, but not here, and here. We want full and open competition. We promote small business, except that we're going to create requirements that inhibit small business participation, et cetera. And then when a small business is successful, how do we reward them? You know, we take them out of the program and, you know, we compete to another new small business. So all of that creates confusion, probably an unprecedented level. That all said, you know, the American model for government contracting, such as it is pretty much a world standard. At the federal level, for sure, I can say that it pretty much operates with integrity, free of political interference. Even with everything going on, RFP, source selections, those are not shared with other people that are not on the team, that are not looking at other than the evaluation criteria. Industry may not agree sometimes with the results, but they have a mechanism called the protest process to do that. It's my opinion, being a little abused right now. It's what meant sometimes just to keep the contract running on a bridge or something. And then you see legislation now about bridge contracts where the perception is it's been abused. But there is always a recourse. So you have to do, I went through several protests. I was 3-0 on my watch on the big healthcare contracts. But you have to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to defend your actions. Because
so Mike, you were 3-0 for the government.
When I got there, it was 0-3, and we, you know, made it 3-0 on the T3s. DHA just awarded the next generation of contracts. I think they went from 3 to 2, but you know, on that, you know, when you're talking $20 billion, you know, you build protest into your acquisition strategy because you know you're going to get one.
So you just brought up something I wanted to come back and ask you. Where your sense is you're seeing contracting officers and government folks are moving away from giving us the stiff arm to being a little more open.
That's what they should be doing. I'm not going to say here and say that all the NCMA members, and by the way, these are NCMA members. You know, even you know, now Joanne Wojtek at NASA Soup or Bridget at NITAC. Those guys, they're at our conferences. They're supporters. They're you know, in our.
And I've worked a lot of proposals over the years, and when I see something that doesn't look right, I know up until an RFP actually gets issued, you're allowed to have some conversation, and then they kind of close the door on you. So if you see something that just doesn't look right in the RFP, when is the right time to ask?
Anytime, at any level. There is nothing wrong. There is, you may get interpretive guidance otherwise, but there is absolutely there is free and open communications up until the day that RFP goes out. Right then, and even then, the communication is there. It needs to be structured. It means you're just trying to be fair to everybody. So you ask a question, you get an answer, depending on what the question was. Everyone needs to have the benefit of that information. So it's just more formalized. It might have to be a letter or an RFP amendment or whatever. But there's no inhibitor to communication up until the day of that RFP going out, and that's an unfortunate myth that maybe continues out there at the local levels.
So when they issue an RFI, request for information, right, that's the time to respond with the questions, have the meetings.
Exactly right. And depending if there's confusion and you're sending in questions, you're not getting good guidance or responsive, it's got to be, you don't want to be the high maintenance company, right? Obviously you want to come across as you know what you're doing, and so if you're sending RFI questions on a daily basis, and no one else is, none of the competitors are, that kind of, you're probably not helping the cause as far as we're a competent company that can respond to your requirement. But certainly reasonable questions need to be asked, and even after award, even after the solicitation's issued, they should be asked. To the contracting officer, not to the project manager, not at the guy at the bar downstairs or in the cafeteria at the agency or whatever. That's not going to get you a credible answer, and in fact, you could taint you could destroy your chances of award should an inappropriate communication occur, as you all know.
So, Mike, are you saying that once that Q&A deadline is on an RFQ is hit, it's recommended that you can still submit questions, or
yes,
okay,
all the way up to award. Okay. Particularly if it affects your interpretation of the requirement. If there's ambiguity, any kind of ambiguity in what that solicitation is saying, that's the goal. You can't ask them questions that lead you to a solution that you think they're looking for. First of all, if there's a solution they're looking for, they should tell you what that is. There should be no secrets. There should be no, well, let's see, see if they, pick up on this. We'll drop a hint. There shouldn't be anything like that. And that's, they should. This is what the requirement is. Probably a big failing is, particularly in IT now, as you know, it's moving so fast that the government is difficult keeping up with what the market offers. And so, I think what you need to really focus on is the requirement, and it should be written at a performance level. Certainly within IT, I was going to read off some 10 trends that I see going on this year, and that, one of them is, the movement towards a cloud solution. The old days, and way back in my career, I could remember doing a solicitation, big RFP for a Cray or, mainframe computer, the big the Watson behind the glass doors and the smoke and the guys back there, and you weren't allowed to know what they do. And, those big computer days are now, they fit right in your pocket, right in your phone. And so we're moving. The government doesn't need to own all those assets. They don't need to have all that equipment, those servers in their building. They may still think they do in many cases. But the rub is the security aspects. How do you get around that? So, but a movement towards a service, cloud services, is one aspect.
So along the same area, I wanted to ask. You're talking about contracting in the future. We've heard about. I look back. Mid '90s is kind of when GSA schedules came about. GWACs, I think SOUP was first awarded in 1993. Was the first one. Cleaner Cohen Act, 96. Created a lot of force behind CIOs to use GWACs and shorten the procurement cycle. We've now hearing about this online marketplace coming about, and it's being dubbed as the Amazon marketplace. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
What that looks.
The director of Amazon Business came to our conference, was one of our keynotes last year, and we put him on stage with one of our senior procurement executives. You may know Elliot Branch. You may know he's the ASNR DNA, and they talked about all that kind of, what does this mean? And I think it was very uncomfortable for our members who, we know what's going on in the world, and have us, have Amazon subscriptions and, buying and all of that, but, well, government's different. And I think it kind of made, and that was the goal, was to make the government the government managers, or everybody, a little uncomfortable that, wow, this could hit me too. The whole role, so this gets into disruptive technology. The difficulty is, and I don't think they've really figured it out, is, how to achieve, and this gets back to the purpose of government contracting, is you have mission, there's a variety of socioeconomic goals they're trying to meet as well. There's a variety of constituencies they're trying to meet. It's no secret that NASA and large companies and, the F-35 has opportunities in many congressional districts. And so how do you weigh that against an online marketplace that could really disrupt the heck out of the way government contracting is done today? So I don't really know where this is going. I mean, I don't think anybody does. I think the director of OFPP, Ann Rung, who left under the Obama administration, works for Amazon Business, and you'll see them around. They may be here. I don't know.
So do you think, or do you think the idea is that all of us companies need to rush out and have our own cloud online marketplace type solution, or do you think we're going to end up all teaming up with Amazon and Google, and there'll be only 3 or 4 online marketplaces?
Yeah, I hope it's not all teaming up with Amazon and Google, although that seems to be what's occurring in the private sector. I would think that, though, there is technology today. Is the federal government fully leveraging that technology? And the answer we all know is not. So if you could, create those sort of online marketplaces, so that you give the leaders in government the alternatives, I think it would behoove you to do that, to be working collaboratively together to create these sorts of things. There is uniquenesses to federal procurement that may not lend itself to an Amazon type of process. And this gets back to all the socioeconomic goals. It's the government, so there's always going to be competing constituencies, and there's always going to be somebody that says, what about me, or you didn't treat me fairly. I'm a taxpayer, and it's taxpayer money, so that's why you got to be fair, you got to be open, you got to be transparent, and that sets government apart from anybody else, and that's not going to change. It hasn't changed in 200 years. This is this online marketplace is the latest iteration of an ongoing process. I was one of the COs on the DIS contract, if you remember that, and DIS was Defense Enterprise Integrated Services, and hundreds of millions of unanticipated dollars, quite frankly, flowed to that contract because it was one of the original IDIQ multiple awards, and it was fostering a certain type of technical architecture that DISA was promoting at the time and so forth. But and now that's been mimicked, and OFPP is trying to, and this gets back to category management, OFPP is trying to police that down, so we don't want this proliferation of vehicles going all over the place. So they're being a little more proactive in managing that, the number of GWACs that are available. And the contracts themselves, whether it's SOUP or the others, have certainly created all types of mechanisms that can keep themselves current from a technological perspective, adding, deleting bidders, and modifying requirements and broadly defining what's on those vehicles. So I can't say that go spend money on an online marketplace today, but I think it would, I think alternatives to Amazon, I'm sure, would be welcomed. And maybe that's the shot over the bow that the folks on Capitol Hill are trying to do. So I think let me get back to and by the way, an outsourced government. So the federal government contract management has been in a kind of, as you know, kind of been on the downhill for like 5 years. For a lot of reasons. A lot of it has to do with polarization, between political parties and not sure what the priorities are, trying to balance budget, et cetera. And I think that's kind of bottomed out. Certain civilian agencies will probably lose a little bit. I don't think it'll be nearly as draconian as what we've been reading about from the administration or anything like that. But clearly, defense will gain. Clearly, it'll defense as much as we know. I don't know. Infrastructure is still out there to be talked about. It's really an unusual situation. It's like as if nothing it's still almost as difficult to read the tea leaves today as it was a year ago. We have gone the longest period in the history of the federal acquisition regulation without a change, without a modification to it. Under the 2-for-1 rule, the regulations can't be changed unless you were to delete 2. So things are backed up. Changes are not being implemented. Political appointments haven't been made. So you have a lot of caretaker kind of activity in the agency. I'm not a big fan, personally, of the AT&L reorganization. I think we'll be developing stovepipes that 5 years from now we'll be talking about breaking down again. The services are not going to be equipped to gain the responsibilities that they're getting, but they're getting them. So that's the law of the land, and that's what's going to happen. So I think that, that's one mistake. Talking about one thing I want to mention, too, you have little booklets in your chairs, and they're just little summaries of the competencies that our contract managers are intended to have. We have our own certification program. Many of our members, of course, have DIWEA, the levels 1, 2, 3 for contracting or project management, those sorts of disciplines in the Defense Department and the civilian agency, the FAC level competencies under the Federal Acquisition Institute. And our association has that as well. Our goal is that at some point we need to become more like industry and have those competencies managed by the professionals themselves as opposed to the United States Congress, just like lawyers and accountants do. The U.S. Congress kind of dictates a lot of the requirements, which keeps them separate and apart and unique and distinct, and therefore there's not enough of them. Therefore, you've seen a lot of grade inflation. You've seen people, I'll put it out there again, won't be happy. People might not like it, but you have people at high-level grades that 10 years ago, they would have not gotten that high. But because of the difficulty in attracting and retaining talent, that some of that has happened. Grade inflation, agencies outbidding themselves. So, again, I mentioned, if there's a problem, ask the contracting officer, and the subcontract manager, the prime. There's a movement towards certainly more and more concern about the supply chain. And one of the legislative items is that the Defense Department needs to examine its supply chain and the security of its supply chain. So the contract manager today, supply chain was not a word I heard in my entire federal career. It was not a word you'd find, a term you'd see in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Yet at the private sector, that's a key issue, and it's becoming more so at subcontract management level. Companies are being subject to CPSRs, contractor purchasing system reviews, where the federal government wants to ensure that those prime companies are properly managing the subcontracts and flowing down clauses and activities, initiatives that the federal government would want to see in the subs, as over up to 50% or more of the dollars that are awarded actually go to subcontracts. So you don't lose that legislative or FAR intent by subbing it out. So you'll see more about that, particularly when you have weapon systems and things where sometimes we don't know sometimes where these parts or components are coming from and who may be listening. So, in terms of the trends that I see sort of happening in the last over the last years, I mentioned federal spending. It's sort of bottomed out, and I think we'll see uptick, not to the level that we think we will. As the polarization again, probably the biggest impact besides overcomplexing the programs is the continued budget standoffs and stops and starts. The lack of secure funding that goes beyond any reasonable time makes it impossible to manage a contracting program with any degree of effectiveness or efficiency. And that's really sad. I don't know, we vote them in and they do what they do. So incumbent win rates, of course, are down. The old days of being relationship-oriented, having, getting in your buddy, my project, the government project manager, he and I are best buds, et cetera, or I used to work in that office and now I'm, wearing the contractor badge and I'm back in the same facility or whatever, probably still important, but not as important. It's driven by pricing and what you bring to the market, LPTA, we could outlaw it or whatever. It'll come back in another form. The government simply wants to, get the best price they can. What is wrong with that? And it's their requirement. Shouldn't they be allowed to determine, what their requirement is and how much they put on quality versus, or whether it matters how much quality. And if you're buying a pencil or common use items. And so you've seen that with the decline in the probably salary structures over the last couple of years in companies and that to respond to that ever-growing competitive environment. A lot of companies are, obviously, you all know this more than I do, looking into other commercial aspects. Whenever the government customer is a little bit on the, not looking as attractive as they were, you start looking at all private sector alternatives. Everybody does that. Our association is doing that in terms of we want to be the buyer and seller procurement association, regardless of the sector you work in. It's kind of all the same.
Mike, what's the ratio of industry and government membership at your
It's actually pretty 50-50. We actually have, this surprises me, we have more government folks, contracting officers, senior executives coming to our conferences than industry. You would think industry would be coming to, to meet their customers. But it's like 60-40 with government and industry at the events. It's about 50-50 with the government. So we have large government, NASA, VA, Defense Department, GSA. They're our largest group customers, along with companies, Raytheon, Boeing, and many smaller groups and services, Leidos and SAC, et cetera. OTAs, other transactions authorities, so this has been around for many, many years. I created the policy at the Energy Department and Procurement when we looked into that as well. OTA, other transaction authority, it's looked at as somehow alternative to the FAR, which I always ask, okay, write 5 bullets or give me specific language in the FAR that is somehow messing us up. And you read lots of blogs and articles and speeches are given about how bad the FAR is, and to me it doesn't always hold water in terms of getting to the specifics, because the problem is not the FAR, the problem is people. And I mentioned about internal authorities and so forth, or it's people just not working together. I have my personal theory on no data supports this, but I think the BRAC initiatives of several years ago, where we broke up buying commands and moved them here and there, and lots of people retired or started teleworking or telegoofing off, and you just don't have that synergy in the team, the teamwork. I was on at Navarre or something. I could walk across the hall and talk to your program managers, talk to your requirements. It was regular to have engineering and everyone together working collaboratively, and now it's all over the place. We saved a few dollars on rent, but I think we lost millions and maybe billions in effectiveness and clear-cut programs by dispersing Navy, Army, Air Force activities the way we have. So that's just I said that. The NCMA does not support that position, and there's no data to support it other than my conjecture. But to me, it's effectiveness and it's people working together. That's the issue. That is the issue. But OTAs are still a contract. Certain things are waived, and you'll see guidance, and it's fun to watch in a way, and a DPAP, and then we'll put out guidance, and you're going to start seeing creep, and we're OT. Well, we need to do this in OTAs, and we have to do. Pretty soon, you're going to have a FAR. There are agencies that are not required to follow the FAR because it's just a great guideline. All right, I've harped on the FAR enough.
What did you say use OTA the most? What agencies would you say would use OTA the most?
Well, DOD certainly is using a DIUX. I think the jury's still out. DARPA, does lots of things. But that's, in innovation, I think those sorts of things are a little easier than in, operationalizing and procuring a hardware or services on an ongoing basis. So I think the jury's still way out. I don't think anyone in any mainstream contract manager would probably not be a big supporter of OTAs as some sort of an answer. So, in terms of future procurement. So, category management, of course, we've seen that with the vehicle consolidations and OFPP. It was the number one initiative, probably still is, lacking any other, or an OFPP permanent director. So, category management is the requirement. It's a little unfair to lay that on the contract manager because, for the most part, they don't control the whole portfolio, even within their agency, even between a subset of their agency. That has to happen almost at the cabinet level. If you're going to buy widgets, if everybody's going to buy the same widgets and leverage the buying power of the federal government, they're going to have to come together. And the way funding is provided, the way agencies are organized, that's extremely difficult. So a contract manager down here is going to say, I've got some widgets, and where can we pool our resources? Can we do the strategic sourcing analysis to know what we need to buy? It's a tough one. So I think it's important to have gotten that out there and to start pushing this, but it's going to have to be a little more dramatic, and it's above the pay grade of the contract manager to create the environment to allow effective strategic category management. And that still doesn't necessarily address other socioeconomic goals of federal procurement. I mentioned reliance on cloud-based solutions. I think you're going to see a wider prevalence of technology tools from requirements to acquisition. So you go to our events, for example, and there's a lot of booths. Folks are selling all kinds of tools that provide more detailed analysis, spend analytics, that are a little more prevalent on the industry side, but that will be used more and more in government, which could free the contract manager up to do almost to be that sort of orchestrator of all these activities. So I mentioned, they're the business advisor, et cetera. They're also the cost and price analysis manager. They're the reporting manager. They have to get that input data into FPDS correctly so that you all know what's going on to that extent.
So
Well, I'm at it, yeah.
What are your thoughts then on that software SIN RFI that's out there by GSA, where they're trying to put all the cloud solutions under SIN 132.4 or
Yeah, I guess my answers would be you have to respond to the RFPs as they are, and you have to try to point out to GSA if there's duplication in the category codes from one SIN to another, and that how do I address that? It's really unfortunate to see that such an over specification of categories. And I understand why they would want to do that, but it's particularly if you're in services, how do you equate apples to apples? And so I don't have a good answer, I guess, is what I just said. It's tough out there. But those technological tools will allow the contract manager to become more of a relationship builder and talking to you all, working with you all, or your project leads, or your contract administrators, or vice presidents, procurement, or whoever at the company level. I think we're certainly going to see more acquisition reform. I don't think we're ever going to not see acquisition reform. The Section 809 panel, I have a little bit of knowledge of that. Many NCMA members are the commissioners on that panel, and they've used our facilities. They actually came in along with a wide, lengthy process of getting out there and listening to people. They've been to our events, and they've spoken to our we have a leadership development program. They've actually interviewed young, like 20, 30-year-olds in contracting. What do you guys think? Et cetera. They've polled our groups and so forth. They've held meetings, hearings in our meetings, and as well as elsewhere. The difficulty is going to be, and this is interesting, I listened to a talk by Deidre Lee, who's the chair of that panel, is what she says is line in, line out. So everybody's got opinions on contracting. We need to do this. You need to do that. You need to do this. Okay, show me specifically. Go to the regulation. Show me the statute. Line out what shouldn't be there and write in what should. And a lot of it goes away after that because it's different. It's a house of cards. It's built. So you pull out one card and you can collapse the whole thing. So they have a really huge challenge. I think they got the right people, and I'm optimistic. It's a little worrisome, though, that as they're doing this work, Congress is over here writing things like the Data Act and other things, legislating, and so it's like you can't shuffle it out fast enough. So, but acquisition reform will be inevitable. How, we've been through these many times, and I could, I hope I didn't offend anybody, but the process actually hasn't improved. Right? It's not any better than it was. But I would go back to the people on that one. So when I talk about acquisition, skill sets are merging. The skill sets to be in acquisition are widening. Certainly technology now, you have to put that in there. Your ability to leverage existing technologies, disruptive technologies. I think it's an optimistic time. We shouldn't look at the Data Act as a bad thing. Maybe it's just an opening act in terms of the future and how it could be simplified and made faster the way we do it in our own private commerce. So I think, it's a threat, but it's an opportunity, and the industry is going to evolve, and it's going to have to change with that. If anything, we probably have a longer time horizon to see what's coming. We know what could be coming, and it will become imperative. Acquisition, as I think it was Secretary Carter said, is a national security imperative, and it just takes too long to get to stuff. I do know that, I will say, though, that, and this is why I believe it's people, whether it's the MRAP or other fast, rapid acquisition programs, when it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight, the system responds. Things happen that need to happen. Sometimes work expands to fill the time available, and if there's not that sense of urgency, and maybe there hasn't been, then things go on and on. I think I'll say this as well. None of these opinions are the opinion of NCMA. It's just me as a contract person saying, for TARA, we can rearrange the deck chairs and so forth and move responsibilities around, but that's just working at the margins. That's not, show me the effectiveness, show me the change in results as a result of these acts. So I don't mean to be a negative person. I think it's a great career. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and it's fun to work with your leaders and create programs and products for taxpayers and to meet your agency's mission. And that's why there's an opportunity for those kind of people that are solutions-oriented. And, and I would say, you need to partner with that government customer, get to know them, get to know those contract managers and the project managers, really try to understand their vision, certainly review the legislations that then the language that they're being given to make things happen. Certainly you want to know internally what's going on at those companies. And you want to go to events like this one or ours or others, to keep your eye on the pulse. We do have an interesting forum where we're going to have Frank Kendall, AT&L, and Robert Hale, the former DOD comptroller. They're going to have a conversation about where we are today. I've coached them and asked them not to be too negative. But it's an interesting time. And the reason change keeps coming because no one's happy with the current results. And so that's what you're seeing. So contracting people are real people. They're nice guys and girls. They're not they're not all perfect. Certainly, they're all overwhelmed, generally speaking, and under-equipped. And some places, many agencies, they just aren't given the stature for the responsibility they're given. I would say many senior leaders in government agencies, contracting, let them deal with it. You can pawn it off, but sooner or later that's going to bite you. If it takes too long, and it does take too long. They should be better. Government should be communicating with you when those RFPs sit out there forever. When the amendments don't come, where the awards just seem to die on the vine. What's really going on? It could be partly we only have funding for 2 more months, or our priorities are really changing, or gosh darn, it's been so long since we issued the solicitation that we don't even know if we want this anymore. It's a lot of that, and that's unfortunate. I think the best thing you can do is always come in there. Well, here's a solution. I truly understand their need, and here's how I can fix it. If you can get that market research, again, is the first phase in the FAR. That's the first thing that should occur well before an RFP, and that's when they are allowed to talk to you all day long. And they don't have to give equal time. They don't have to talk to you and then they have to talk to your competitor. Not during market research. They should be aware of all the products and services to meet their needs. But I would say, really understand their requirement. Don't go in with a solution looking for the right requirement to jam in it. I would find out, understand their requirement, and be willing to adapt your solution to their requirement. And it may be a process issue more than it is a technology issue, oftentimes, in terms of at least IT.
So speaking of overhaul and changes, do you think the current administration is going to overhaul the acquisition code so we submit proposals on a postcard?
I'm sure, right with our tax forms.
Yes.
Right? So I put the acquisition system much like the tax code. It grows with complexity because things are patches and different communities are being served, and we can see what's happening with the tax code as they try to clean that up. And I think the same case is true in the FAR. That would be a great ideal. There's something in the FAR that I used to do way back when was called IFBs, Invitation for Bids. Mm-hmm. I would argue that many requirements that are issued under an RFI or under an RFP or RFQ could be done by a bid. Just here's what I want. Give me your price. The opening will be at noon on Friday. Submit your sealed bid, and we'll. Why we don't do more of that, I don't think the nature of procurement has changed that much. Maybe in D.C. in terms of the kinds of technological services we're looking for, et cetera. But when you're specifying sins and clins to the level that we are, maybe you need to just issue a bid. Then there's no source selection. There's no best value. This is it. You either met, the guy's got a degree, he's got X years of, and this is what he makes. What else is there to talk about? And he's not a jerk. And you can work with him. Or her. All right.
So do we have any questions out here? Where's a microphone? And we'll get Chuck after this one.
By the way, if you always want contracting support, always make sure you have donuts in your meetings. At least somebody will show up. Yes. Hey, Mark.
How you doing?
Good. You're going to give me a hard time? You're going to throw me a curveball?
I'll throw your softball first, then maybe a little harder.
Okay.
When's the event for DC?
4th and 5th at the Hyatt Regency, Crystal City.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Crystal City?
Yep, moved not DC anymore. Crystal City. Yeah.
Not my favorite.
Arlington, Virginia.
OFPP came out with a 16 best-in-class contracts recently. Any comments on that? Because they seem to be driving the category management initiatives through these chosen vehicles.
No other comments, I guess. Just what I said in terms of OFPP. really trying to, they don't, OFPP does not own the government, right? They, the procurement agencies can, and defense, most importantly, can just thumb their nose at a lot of what OFP does. So they're kind of a cheerleader. They're not in a total driver's seat. With category management, things like that, they are. And it's commendable for them to try to do that. Like I said, coming from OFPP, maybe it needs to be coming from OMB, if not the White House itself, in terms of this is how you executive departments are going to play ball. We want to leverage the buying power. We believe there's hundreds, millions, perhaps billions of dollars to be saved through category management. So I think that's another iteration of trying to do that. But it's going to be difficult at the contracting level. It's kind of late. But.
Okay. Bill, you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, according to the FAR, on IDIQ contracts, what responsibility is the government required to give you in terms of feedback when you've placed a bid on an IDIQ? And the reason I ask is we've placed dozens and dozens of bids in response to RFQs on IDIQs, and unless you win, you never get anything back from the KO. He doesn't tell you who won, how much the winning bidder won. What are they required to give you? Unless there's a
clause in the contract that requires some sort of debriefing, there's no FAR 15 application there. So, if it's not already a requirement of the contract under their fair opportunity process to award, when they ask for the proposals, et cetera, I think, but I mean, to your point, there's nothing to prevent you. By the way, folks, there's something called the changes, there's the changes clause, which allows the government to almost do whatever they want, just so you know. They have an unusually unilateral authority in terms of making changes to a contract. But there's also something called the engineering change proposal clause, an engineering ECP clause. Sometimes, that sounds like something technical, It's actually ways where you can suggest changes to a program or to a contract or to a product that might improve productivity and performance. So, I mean, to me, it's write a letter and explain, we really want to do the best we can. We're not winning these. We would like to know why. We've spent money. We've invested firm to get onto this schedule or this contract. And, we're getting zero feedback. That is not right. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that contract officer is not a member of NCMA, but if he was, we would straighten him out.
Yeah. Especially true in the IDIQ contracts.
Okay. And I think Chuck had a question. Do you need the mic?
No, I don't think so. My voice is loud.
All right.
So in the last year or so, I've noticed a lot of traction, I guess, within Army to use OTAs and consortium. What's your feeling and opinion on this as a trend within the industry for contracting and procurement?
I think it's a little bit. We're, like I said, they're looking for solutions. We're looking for ways to do things faster. So if your premise is that the FAR is the problem, then you're going to create an OTA transaction to go faster, better, cheaper. And maybe you initially can, but over time, like you said, right off the bat, there's companies or there's opportunities that are not being used, addressed. That the best resources may not being brought to bear. And over time, I don't think that's the long-term solution. So you're probably seeing pressure from on high to go OTA in some of these things. They shouldn't be used unless they should be very unusual. Other transaction authorities it should be very unusual. It shouldn't become anything that's mainstream. And I think there's no evidence to support any data to support that OTA is a more effective instrument. So, Mr. Hazlitt, the head of procurement, will be at our conference next week if you want to come and ask him that. But, I think, again, these folks are all trying to do the best job. They get there's just a lot of political influence. I think the most worrisome is when I know, I will say this again about our folks in our profession that, nobody ever asks us. Mm-hmm. It's the trade groups and organizations, companies are in there with solutions, but sometimes those that actually done it. Is there anybody in the room that's actually done it there when these proposals or legislation is created? And,
just to dovetail off of that, because of the ease of which the OTA is presenting itself to any opportunity under roughly about $50 million, do you see that more as a trend or as a threat or as a combination of both within the procurement cycles for either DoD or civilian?
I mean, the use of OTAs, you say?
Yes.
I think it's a trend right now. I wouldn't call it a threat. Because I think over time, it'll take care of itself. It'll be, unless they're wildly successful, and even then, why? Why were they successful? Probably because they were treated different and special, because they were purposed to be held up as a model of how well things can be done. But for the mainstream of procurement, I don't think it's a threat.
I have a question. Someone actually asked me this yesterday.
And, the answer is no. It'll take me 2 years, and bring me the PR and bring me the rock.
Regarding open source software that's now being, a lot of the software manufacturers are developing products, are using open source, which they didn't invent and didn't write, can't certify to its reliability. Yet the government wants them to certify and take responsibility for that software package that they're selling. So how does a software company
The government's wrong
tangle with that?
when they ask for intellectual property that, first of all, is open source, or they ask for intellectual property that they don't need, or that provides that, and that is an impediment, I think, to doing business with the government. Sometimes is the government's almost on autopilot asking for data and IP that, if it was built, if we paid for it, we want it, or whatever. All of that should be negotiable, and you can understand where the government doesn't want to be beholden to a company for long-term follow-on work or services. You can see where this is going, but if it's your proprietary product and you see other markets for it, et cetera, I think you should fight to retain that. The use of open source makes no sense. I know that as a contract folks, a lot of people, you need to ask questions. Sometimes, as a contracting officer, some office somewhere inserts that requirement, and it just goes through on autopilot, and next ends up in the contract. The contracting officer is typically not going to be smart enough or sophisticated enough to challenge that, but they should. And and I think companies need to push back on that. So it should not be. We ask for cost and pricing data oftentimes when it's not necessary. Want to know exactly how you built that requirement. If it's meeting government, if it's a competitive environment, and if it's a standard industry practice or things like that, they don't need that data either. So some of those things are vestiges that need to be put to bed.
We have time for one last question. There's a mic right beside you.
Oh, no.
Yes, sir. This is in regards to the EIS contract, obviously. And my question is, with your experience with WITS, what's your perspective when it comes to the opportunities for the telecom and networking IT vendors with this vehicle?
I'm not going to. I can't specifically. I don't know that much about EIS. I will say, as a general statement, with regards to all the various contracts that you went over, when agencies create these specific. First of all, I worked for 6 or 8 government agencies and companies, and every single time you sit at the interview and they'd say, "Oh, and by the way, we're very unique." I mean, everyone thinks they're special and different and unique. Sorry, but sometimes the products and services aren't that unique. They may be if you're, in certain instances. But generally speaking, everybody's got IT and service. A lot of products and services are not that unique, and the mission is unique, but how you accomplish it may be very similar. And so, I don't necessarily appreciate proliferation of agency-specific vehicles that then become mandatory to that agency. That does raise your costs. GSA, would like to be America's buyer. We know that. And many opportunities they could be. I think GSA's had difficulty, they would say, over time in gaining the trust and the integrity of the wider contracting or acquisition community throughout government, so that many of those common use items or products could be bought on their own particular vehicles or their schedules. So I think the schedules program is also a little bit under review itself. But I think to the extent you could create more wider GWACs, fewer of them, that also offer opportunities under certain conditions for small and large business, et cetera, you could streamline a lot of work in the way a government acquires it. So there's certainly that opportunity, and whether that takes an OFPP to mandate those things or whatever, gets back to category management. So government collaborating more closely together can do that. A lot of companies, of course, enjoy the way it operates today. You know, they have their niches and markets, and the last thing they want is, you know, other agencies or the ability for other companies to get into those individual niches. So, but to me, and I think that's the intent of OMB in the future, is to try to do that. Right now, they need some permanent leadership.
So the EIS contract did broaden the scope. So it allows that telecom, but it broadens it for other products and services and gives greater opportunity for the industry.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Michael, for coming today on such short notice. We really appreciate that. Did you want to say something about your organization?
Just we do have a conference. We'll have 1,000 people next week at the Hyatt in Crystal City. I have this is an example of our monthly magazine. It happens to be the one for the upcoming event. This is what we sell. We don't sell. We give these as members, but it just gives you an idea of the articles, which, by the way, you guys can write into or input into, et cetera, or advertise. But you know, on the kinds of topics our members are reading. We have an editorial calendar, so we talk about, we'll have a category management issue, we'll have a commercial issue, we'll have a state and local edition, procurement, different topics of procurement, the FAR issue, you know, things like that. So just to give you, the goal just being to let you better understand where our members come from. I handed out, I didn't have enough, but these little bodies of knowledge, these little Simbach books, they give you an idea of the competencies that our people, that didn't come out right, our contract managers need to understand and learn, and they certify against. So contract managers are real people too. So anyway,
that's great.
Be nice to your contracting officer.
All right, thank you, Michael.